Hey everybody, good uh, evening. I'm at work, obviously, and I wore this to work on Friday, but I'm not wearing this right now because that would be weird because I wash my clothes. Um, we're going to give this little book a go here. It's going to be a little bit different from what I usually do. Like I said, um, there is a lot of scripture covered in this lesson, but we're not actually going to read very much at all. Just because it tries to cover the entire book of Daniel. So you hear me talking a lot, giving a lot of background, explaining the stories, a whole lot of story time if you guys like story time. Um, so yeah, that's how we're gonna do it. Yes, this is an Avengers scrub top for anyone who is out there wondering, and I think Amber got it for me. And it was a gift, but I would have bought it for myself too. So no big deal. There is also um, something for you guys to read and something that goes with one of your guys' goals. You know who you are, possibly. There's a verse of the month here. So that's 1 John 1 9. If Amber wants to help you guys get turned there and read that. 1 John, not the Gospel of John, 1 John chapter 1, verse 9. So you can read it, study it, maybe memorize it if any of you guys have a goal for such a thing. Um, feel free to pause me as you need to and do your thing and move on. Also, hopefully, you guys had the chance to listen to Mr. Four Lines this morning. I, at this point, when I'm speaking, have not, and also when you guys are listening to this, will not have had the opportunity to. But I'm gonna go back and watch the service. I'm sure it was neat to hear um, about what his occupation is like. He is out spreading the gospel, doing his best to tell people who don't know who Jesus is about who Jesus is. Um, if you guys want to have a short little discussion, maybe about missionaries and who is called to be a missionary, whether at home or abroad, if that's all of our job, maybe that's a good, quick little talk about that you guys can have. As far as the lesson, though, like I said, we're going to the book of Daniel. Daniel takes place um, at the Babylonian exile and throughout the Babylonian exile. Daniel is one of the people who makes it from start to finish of the exile. Amber, if you want to use the little um, timeline we made, see if you can give that a place on there. Um, Jerusalem was actually destroyed twice in this spot by Babylon. So they came in the first time, wiped it out, destroyed it, took the king and his sons. Actually, if I remember right, put out the eyes of the king. That's in the Kings and Chronicles books. It's not in Daniel. Um, and took all the healthy, smart, strong, basically the up and coming people of Israel, of Judah, and took them to Babylon to teach them how to be a Babylonian, to teach them how to basically to assimilate them into their culture. So Amber's going to pass out a sheet that just has some information as far as background goes um, on the exile in Babylon, on the situation that Daniel finds himself in. He's young. He's your guys' age, probably. Um, Truthfully, probably right at your guys' age, possibly a little bit older, but if so, not very much at all. He's a mid to late teenager, most likely when he gets taken to Babylon. So if you guys can put yourself in his shoes and imagine, you're in your own country, you're having a great time, right? Um, you're in the country that's supposed to be serving God, right? The God Most High is the only God you serve. You follow His laws, and you get pulled over into this other culture that serves multiple different gods, right? The gods of Babylon. Um, and you're supposed to assimilate into that culture. So you can see how Daniel is going to possibly have a struggle with this later on. And we'll get there because he does, because Daniel continues to serve God and only God. Daniel himself is, like I said, from Judah. He's a teenager. He's not in the king's court per se, but he's a more well-off one of the kids. And the book has us wanting to explore 4 different key roles and key titles, kind of, for Daniel. The first one they want us to look at was that he was an exile. And an exile is just someone who is removed from their own country, removed from their place of being, and in somewhere that's not familiar to them, somewhere that has a different culture, somewhere that has different rules, somewhere that has different people, and removed from the place that they feel comfortable. So when we talk about like John the Revelator, he was placed in exile and he was more or less by himself, but he was still just removed from what his normal living was. But when we meet Daniel, he is already in he's already in Babylon. So it doesn't talk much about the exile itself, but it picks up, and Daniel is supposed to be, this is the first story we're going to go through. Daniel is supposed to be learning the ways of the Babylonians, learning the ways of the Chaldeans, it says. And what that includes is him getting a portion of the king's meat and a portion of the king's drink. Problem is, the Babylonians did not eat the way that the Jewish people were supposed to eat. They had the laws that God had given them, and they were supposed to eat certain foods. They weren't, more importantly, supposed to eat other types of foods. The Babylonians didn't follow those rules. So Daniel basically goes through and requests of the person who is over him and over all of the people that are like him, because Babylon didn't just conquer Israel and Judah, didn't just conquer Judah. They conquered a bunch of different places. And they took people from all of those places and were trying to assimilate them into their culture, raise them up to be good little Babylonians, basically, right? So Daniel talks to the person that's over them and says, hey, I'm not going to, he says, defile himself with the king's meat. So he requests and he makes this challenge that for, I think, 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is what their Babylonian names are. They have Jewish names too, but we know them by their Babylonian names. Daniel and his 3 friends, can we just have pulse and water for these 10 days? Pulse is like a vegetable, kind of ground up pea soup type, kind of a nasty stuff, right? So can we just have that and water for 10 days? At the end of these 10 days, see what we look like. Look at what all the other kids look like that have been eating the king's meat, right? And then you can judge for yourself what you're supposed to do. Because this guy that's over Daniel and his friends, if he gets through this time period and Daniel and his friends look weak and unhealthy and sickly and all that stuff, it's going to be his head on the chopping block, right? So he's kind of nervous, but he says, okay, we'll do this 10-day challenge, whatever. So at the end of the 10 days, they present themselves before Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Babylon at this time. And sure enough, Daniel and his friends actually look better than all the other kids that were eating the nice food from the king's table, eating the meat from the king's table, drinking the wine from the king's table, right? Eating what should have been healthier food, right? Potentially, is at least more extravagant food, more affluent. But Daniel and his friends looked better, not because of what they ate necessarily, but because God was with them and they were listening to what God wanted them to do. So rather than compromise their beliefs, their morals, the laws that God had given them, they stood up and did what they were told to do by God, and it worked out for them, right? So the book wants us to have a little discussion question, and you guys can do that. You can pause me and do the thing. It says, life lesson 1 is not to let the world squeeze you into its mold, because unfortunately the world is not going to be inclined to serving God, right? The world is always going to try and pull you down from serving God. That's just fact of the matter. Now, we're supposed to be a light to the world, so it's not like we're supposed to remove ourselves from it. We're supposed to be in the world, but we can't let them affect our morals, our beliefs, all that kind of stuff. But what little compromises are Christians today tempted to make? And do they matter? Do those little compromises matter, right? So maybe that's clothing. Maybe that's lifestyle choices. Maybe that's the way we speak. I don't know. This is where you pause me and Amber talks and you talk and you discuss the question. And when you guys are done, we're going to move on to the second life lesson, which says, be respectful, especially when dealing with those in authority. And that one almost feels like that one almost feels like brainwashing, but it is true. It's a biblical thing to be respectful to those who are in authority, because the Bible says that God put those who are in authority in that place. So if you're being disrespectful to a king or a president or a whatever, you are in turn being disrespectful towards God, because they're only in that place because God allowed it. So be mindful of that. Basically what the book calls out is just that Daniel, in all his interactions with these people who are over him, was respectful. He wasn't pushy. Even though he didn't want to do what they wanted him to do, he was respectful about his declining their food or their request. He wasn't hateful about it. He wasn't pushy. He wasn't forward, right? So we can learn from that. But we're going to move on from that one pretty quickly. The second thing it gives Daniel was that he was a wise man. So something else we find that Daniel was really good at was interpreting dreams. So the next story we go through, King Nebuchadnezzar, if you remember him, King Neb, if you want to call him that, has a dream. Keeps him from being able to sleep. He doesn't like the dream. It's terrible. Problem is, when he wakes up, he doesn't know what the dream was. Not only does he not know what the dream meant, he doesn't even know what the dream was. So he brings in the magicians, the soothsayers, the Chaldeans, the wizards, all the people that are supposed to be wise and have all this knowledge of all these, ethereal, awesome things, right? And he says, I need you to tell me the interpretation of my dream. And the wizards, the magicians, they say, okay, we can do that. Awesome. What was your dream? And Nebuchadnezzar says, well, anybody could tell me the interpretation of my dream if I told them what the dream was. You need to both tell me what my dream was and the interpretation of it. And they're like, that's not possible. We're not in your head, basically, right? We can't see what you dreamed. And Nebuchadnezzar says, okay, then I'm going to kill all of you. Because he has the authority to do so. He's the king of Babylon. He's the king of the known world at this time, right? He has the largest empire in the area. No big deal. He can do what he wants. Unfortunately, all of those people that would have been killed would have included Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, remember. Obviously, that's bad news for Daniel. He's not a big fan of that. So he again respectfully asks the person over him to give them some time. It's in the passage in Daniel 2. How long that was, I don't remember. But give them some time to see if they can interpret what Nebuchadnezzar's dream was. And what do? They pray about it, right? So on that time that they've asked for to try and interpret this, they pray to God. They say, help us figure out what this dream is. Tell us what this dream means, because you are God and you give dreams and you know the future. You know what's going on. You're all powerful, all knowing, right? Sure enough, he does. Life lesson 3 that it calls out before we get into what the dream was and what the dream meant. is to pray for God's help. Because Daniel is obviously faced with a pretty impossible task, right? It's one thing to make up an interpretation or to know an interpretation to a dream when someone tells you what the dream is. It's a whole other thing entirely to both be able to tell the person who had the dream what the dream was and what the dream means. So the only recourse was to pray to God, and he did. And it's a good thing he did. So he goes back to the king, and he says, "O king, live forever." And that's basically just a respectful way to address a king. We don't have kings anymore, so, if you want to say, "Oh, mom and dad, live forever," that's cool too. I'm sure they'd appreciate it. Or if you want to tell Amber, "Oh, Amber, live forever," she'd probably feel pretty awkward. So you guys can do that too if you want to. He goes into Nebuchadnezzar. He says, "King, you've had a dream of a giant statue. The statue is huge, reaches up to the sky, right? Its head's gold, the chest and the arms are silver, the stomach and thighs are bronze, the legs are made of iron, and the feet are iron and clay." And that's all cool and stuff. It says also in the dream, a stone crushes the feet, and the statue is toppled, and a wind comes by and blows away the debris. So that was the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. Sounds pretty cryptic. So Daniel moves on to tell him the interpretation of said dream. Dream was interpreted in such a way that there were multiple kingdoms. The top kingdom, the head of gold, was Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom of Babylon. After that, there would be more kingdoms that were inferior in some way to Babylon, right? Not as precious, right? Gold is the most precious metal. Silver is still nice, not gold. Iron, durable, but not very expensive or pretty, right? And then the clay and iron is, again, iron, but worse. Nebuchadnezzar says, "Awesome job interpreting the dream. You're promoted," basically. Gives Daniel and his three friends a position of authority over the kingdom. So, the next place it has Daniel, maybe the last, did I already go through those ones? I don't think so. But anyway, was that Daniel was a messenger from God. And we are all that, right? I'm not going to go out so far and say we're all prophets or whatever. Some people do say that. I think that's an extra step. However, we are all meant to give God's message to the world, whether or not that's just the gospel itself, speaking the word of God in such a way to show them who God is, or whether that's God nudging you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, you need to talk to this person about such and such." Daniel was good about faithfully delivering God's message, whether that was interpreting a dream, whether that was telling people what needed to be said, even if it was dangerous for him, right? Because if you remember in the dream, the statue gets toppled, which means the kingdoms are all going to fall. Saying something like that to a king, telling him that your kingdom is going to eventually fall, runs the risk of getting you killed, right? But Daniel faithfully said what God told him to say, and we should do the same thing. The odds of us getting killed for it, especially here in the United States, are pretty low. It doesn't mean it's easier for us to be faithful, but we do need to be faithful. So, the other story is Belshazzar. So a little bit after this, and unfortunately, this book is jumping over the fiery furnace story, but the fiery furnace story is the same Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that were friends with Daniel. If you have time at the end, which you should, probably, Amber can go through that story. It's a fun one. It's not covered in this lesson, but it's pretty cool. And one of my favorite quotes from the Bible is in there. I don't know if Amber knows what it is, but she can guess, and then I can ask her later if she guessed the right one, and that would be a fun game for me. There are, after Nebuchadnezzar, this person named Belshazzar comes in. Belshazzar is technically a co-regent with his father of Babylon. This is a few steps after Nebuchadnezzar. He decides to do something that is definitely against what um, God would have. When they destroyed Jerusalem and they destroyed the temple and they broke down the walls and they took all the people out of Jerusalem, right? That was when the exile happened. They took the cups, the plates, the vessels out of the temple of God. And they've had them in storage, but this Belshazzar here decides to throw a party for all of his nobles, for all his royals, for all the people, all his buddies, friends. And in the midst of this party, Belshazzar makes the decision to bring out the vessels from the temple of God and use them to drink out of and have his party, right? So a cup that is supposed to be designated for use in the temple, for use in service to God, he's using like a normal drinkware cup, right? So all the holiness, all the word that starts with an S that I can't think of. But anyway, all the stuff that makes that cup more than just a cup, Belshazzar spitting in the face of, drinking out of it, probably drinking something he should not be drinking out of it, right? Or at least more of that stuff than he should be drinking. And then all of a sudden, he looks over and he sees a hand writing on the wall, and it's just a hand. No person is doing it, it's just a hand writing 4 letters on the wall. So obviously, the party gets a little shaken by such a thing, and Belshazzar calls for all the wise people. He's like, hey, can someone tell me what this means? And someone pipes up and says, hey, actually, while Nebuchadnezzar was king, there was this dude from Judah that could like interpret dreams and seemed to be really smart and stuff. And they're like, okay, what's his name? He's like, oh, his name's Daniel. He's like, okay, well, go get that guy because I need to know what this is. So sure, they go and get Daniel. And this is another example of Daniel saying what he has to say, what God has given him to say, regardless of the circumstance, regardless of what it might mean for him. So he comes in, he reads the letters, and there's 4 letters on the wall. Amber can turn there if you want to go through those stories. You don't have to, but it's Daniel chapter 5. 2 of the letters are the same letter. That's just for emphasis, but it's Mene, Tekel, Paris, or Upharsin. It's different conjugations of the same letter. Anyway, point being, it says, he says the gist of the letters on the wall is that God has judged you. He's talking to the king. He says, God has judged you and found you lacking, and the kingdom is going to be taken from you. That's a bold thing to come in and say to a king, right? But it's what God told him to say. And so he said it faithfully. The king honors his word. The king gives Daniel a nice new robe, sets him in a position of authority once again. That chapter ends saying that Darius the Mede comes in and blows up the party, kills Belshazzar, takes over Babylon in that moment. So, again, speak God's truth respectfully when opportunities arise. Now, this is outside of this lesson, but I think it's a good discussion point for you guys to have. We have this conversation of speaking the truth in love. I don't know if you've heard people say that or not. Pretty common church lingo to speak the truth in love. So I'm nervous. I'm going to look and make sure the phone's still recording. Okay, cool. It is. I would have really hated to have to record all this again because this is already real awkward. Sorry. So, speaking the truth in love, right? The opposite of speaking the truth in love would be speaking the truth with the purpose of shaming someone, right? So, let's say someone is, I don't know, addicted to something, right? Whatever it might be. Drugs, alcohol, pornography, it doesn't matter. Let's say this person is addicted to something. Speaking the truth in love would be saying, going to them and saying, hey, actually, you guys discuss. Come up with examples of what speaking the truth in love would be, and come up with an example of what speaking with the intent to shame would be. But you got to speak the truth in both situations. Pause me, have a discussion, all that good stuff. Okay, so hopefully you came up with speaking the truth in love might be something like, hey, I know whatever you're addicted to seems nice for now, but it's going to ruin your life. And God has said that we can't do that. So let me help you out of it. Right? That's a hard conversation to have. And it's going to sound different depending on the words and depending on what they're addicted to and depending on the person you're talking to. But the opposite of that, right, is talking down to them, saying, you know what you're doing is terrible. You're an awful person for doing those things, right? You're not helping them, right? Calling out sin in someone's life is necessary. Doing it because you want to set yourself above them or because you want to cast them down, not the way to go about it. Whenever you're calling out sin in someone else's life, the purpose should be restoring them to a faithful relationship with God. Okay, discuss now social media's effect on this conversation, right? How quickly, when someone sees a video on social media, when something goes viral that shouldn't have gone viral, right? Say, for instance, a picture of someone gets leaked out and spread everywhere. How quickly people are to shame that person for a mistake they've made or for whatever it might be, right? So the lack of accountability for actions and the ease of accessibility to other people's failures, right? Which is what social media has given us, right? You've got a computer screen in front of you and between you and who knows who, right? So it's hard for them to really come back at you for you saying something rude, mean, disrespectful, right? And it's excessively easy to see how other people mess up. So social media has made this a lot bigger of a problem than it used to be. But it also has given us a lot more opportunity to be gracious, to be merciful, as our God has been merciful to us. So, not the last life lesson, but the intro for the last life lesson is to live for God even when it may cost you. Which is kind of what I've said in other spots already anyway. But this is where we get to Daniel and the lion's den. Everyone's favorite story. At least it's my kid's favorite story, probably. Maybe not. Maybe. Essentially, Daniel is in with King Darius, right? Who may or may not be the same person as Cyrus the Great. That's a historical conversation that's not really pertinent to our lesson here. So, King Darius, people who don't like Daniel convinced King Darius to make it a law that for the next 30 days, no one can pray to anyone except the king. Right? Sure enough, that's fine. The king's a good guy, right? But Daniel is in the habit of praying 3 times a day on the top level of his house. And guess what Daniel does when he hears about this new law that he's only allowed to pray to Darius? If you said he continues to pray to God anyway, you would be correct. So he keeps on keeping on, praying to God 3 times a day like he is supposed to. And the people that don't like Daniel, that were trying to get him caught up in a issue, go to the king and they say, "O king, live forever." Because it's what we're supposed to say to kings, right? And they say, "One of your servants, Daniel, has been, praying to his God, when your law says that you're only allowed to pray to the king. And they throw in the fact, king, that the law of the Medes and Persians, who is ruling Babylon at this time, right? The Medes, Darius the Mede, Mede. It's a place, Media. Anyway, not the point. The law of the Medes and Persians can't be changed. So the king's kind of caught in a trap. He likes Daniel. He doesn't want him to be punished for this. However, because the law is the law, he casts the judgment on Daniel. And the specific judgment in this case is to be cast into a den of lions, which is bad news because lions eat people, right? So, sure enough, Daniel comes up and he says, O king, live forever. And Darius says, we got to throw you in the lion's den. Sorry about your luck. So they do. They put him in the lion's den. They roll the stone in front of it. They seal it. And Darius goes back to his house sick. He is just wanting to vomit all night. He stays up. He doesn't sleep at all. He is hoping that the God of heaven delivers Daniel from this punishment that he has given him, that Darius has given him. So morning rolls around, hasn't slept, runs out there, says, Daniel, has the God whom you serve so well delivered you? And Daniel says, O king, live forever. I'm good, right? My God sent an angel to close the mouths of the lions. And they were peaceful with Daniel all night. Because even if their mouth was closed, they still could have clawed him and pawed him and beat him up that way. If you've ever seen a lion or heard a lion, like, in person, they're scary. Like, even if they had no teeth, they'd be scary. They're big, they're loud, it's wild. Anyway, back to it. Climbs up out of the den of lions, safe, whatever. Darius decides to throw the people who tricked him and their families into the den of lions. They do not have the same luck that Daniel had, unfortunately. But Daniel, even though he knew, it says he knew what the law was. He knew that if he prayed to Darius, prayed to God, odds were Darius was going to throw him in the den of lions. He did it anyway. And we are called, if that is our situation, to live the same way Daniel did. It's not for us, generally. Sorry, that was probably loud. Generally speaking, we don't have to worry about that so much. We're not at risk of being thrown into harm's way for serving God. However, it will probably eventually come to that, and we have to be prepared to live the way that God would have us live, regardless of the opposition. So it asks how your prayer life is different from Daniel's. What's one thing you could learn from him? And that's where my challenge to you for this week comes in. Pray 3 times a day, like Daniel did. It's not that hard. You can do it when you wake up. You can do it when you eat your lunch. And you can do it when you go to bed. 3 times, pretty easy. Markers in the day, right? The other lesson it gives out is that we need to be faithful to God because he will protect his people. Cool? Cool. The book of Daniel goes on to have a series of prophecies and visions that Daniel has, one of which showing some person called the Ancient of Days. It's one of Daniel's visions of God. And the Son of Man, someone like unto the Son of Man comes up. And that's why people get real upset with Jesus in the New Testament for calling himself the Son of Man, because he's referring to this, right? And gains the kingdom from this Ancient of Days that has everlasting dominion. So there's prophecies of Jesus in the book of Daniel. Pretty cool. If you want to read one of the major prophets, Daniel is probably the most digestible. It's 12 chapters, I think. I think it's 12. They're not excessively long. And the whole first half of the book is like narrative stories. You've got the story I told you with the pulse and the water. You've got the story of the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You've got a story of Nebuchadnezzar going crazy and eating grass like a cow for 7 years. Kind of cool, kind of fun. It gets kind of hard towards the end of the book with all the prophecy and stuff, but it's a good prophet to read as far as getting one of the major prophets in and kind of seeing what that's all about, but not being completely blown off your rocker like Ezekiel would do. So take your pick. Amber's also going to give. If you guys have ever played Strands, it's just a little activity because it's fun. You can take it home and do it, or you can do it in your free time in class. I don't know how much time we'll have left, but Strands is like a word search, and then one of the words is the theme of the word search, and it goes from one side of the puzzle to the other side of the puzzle. So she's going to give you one of those because it's a good time. But like I said, challenge for this coming week is to pray 3 times a day, even if other people are around you. And you can use those other people around you to help with your prayers. You can say, hey, I'm about to pray. Is there anything you guys want me to pray for? It's kind of bold. It's kind of scary to be out there like that. But most people appreciate that sort of thing. Or they'll go, that's okay. Or you might learn something about them that you didn't know. You might be able to confide something in you and ask for help from God. It's pretty cool. Also, I'm sure all of you are already doing this with a big eye roll. So you can read your little devotional thingies. These thingies. Right? I think Amber's been doing it, so she can tell you whether it's been productive or not. I've been trying to read through and study for this lesson and the following. So I don't know about that, but Amber's been doing it, so it's probably good. Good news, bad news. I got a new job. That's the good news. Bad news is I'll start for 4 weeks. So including this week, I will unfortunately be recording 4, I think, of the next 5 Sundays. I will be here in person next week. Obviously not today that you guys are listening to this, but a week from when you're listening to this, I think I'll be in person. And then the other ones I'll be digital. But then after that, my new job is Monday through Friday, so I shouldn't miss another Sunday for work related stuff. So that'll be cool. I don't know if I missed anything else, but talk to your friends about the trip. Feel free to invite school friend, right? Anything like that. Just make sure you let us know who's intending to go. We'll maybe get a sign up sheet or something in the back of the church, maybe. Or maybe I'll send out a link to a Google form. I don't know. I'm not sure. Something. Just so we can get a head count. I don't care how many people go. Even if it's a ton of people, we'll find money if we need to find money. But we shouldn't need to find money. We've got money. That's fine. You can also see behind you a big old whiteboard. Don't know if Amber used it or not, but I'm pretty stoked about that. So you guys can actually see my writing, perhaps, and it won't be so tiny that it's pointless. So that'll be cool. Thanks to Keith for that one. He got it hung up for us. Questions, comments, snide remarks. I can't ask them because I'm not in person, but you can bug Amber with them. Have a good week, guys. Hate to have missed you. I hate having to do this every time I have to do this. But I'll see you next week. Okay? Till next time. It was supposed to stop recording, but it didn't.